on Turf Business TV today, I'm joined by a bit of a legend in the industry, Poggy Pogson from Campy, also known as Mr. Ambassador. So, Poggy, thanks for joining us. Spectacular view in the background there. I take it you're not actually in New Zealand.
No, I'm sitting comfortably in Herefordshire, which is almost as beautiful as the backdrop, and that is one of my memorable places, that background.
So you've had a long career. You've travelled a lot. Let's kind of go back to your start of your turf care journey. You came over from kind of an ag background and an area in where you're looking after tractors mainly. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. It was. If you go right back, I didn't quite know when I left school what I wanted to do. What I knew I didn't want to do was to stay in service on the estate where I was brought up, and I wandered around a little bit until I found a niche with an agricultural cooperative, which led me eventually into becoming a salesman. They used to say back in those days I'd got the gift of the gab. I wasn't quite sure whether that was a compliment or not, but it worked for me, and I always wanted to sell tractors. Being a boy growing up in the countryside, you want to drive tractors and ride on tractors.
So tractors were the attraction. You worked, I think, for a while for Izeki.
That brought me into the ground care side, and it was a different marketplace altogether, where big was beautiful. In the ag side, when you came into ground care, it was quite the opposite. They wanted something light on its toes, manoeuvrable. Cost was also a bit of an issue as well, with buying big tractors on ag tyres and the like. So it was an industry I knew existed, but didn't realise how big it was until I got involved.
So that's around 40 years ago that you were working. You were with Izeki then. How long did that relationship last for you?
Just over 10 years.
Fruitful?
Yeah,
okay.
10 years, yeah. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very sad when we all had to go because they got into partnership with Massey Ferguson. Massey Ferguson very much wanted to do things the Massey Ferguson way, which was slightly different to Izeki. So I'm afraid we all bar one, were left looking for alternative employment. The age I was at that time was a bit difficult.
So is that when you joined forces with Campy, or was there something?
No. I had a couple of other companies before then. Amazon for a start, which was probably one of the, looking back with the grandfather paradox, you wouldn't have done, but
right, okay.
But then I joined Turfmate until I joined Richard. I thought that would be sort of the last job I was doing, but hey, here I am, still smiling.
So your role with Campy started when?
I've been with Richard now, it's my 15th year, so...
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So about the time I got involved in the turf care industry myself, so you've been a constant face in my life.
In your side.
No, I wouldn't put it that way. We've chatted many times, but as I think I said to you earlier, we've always chatted about machinery, exhibitions. We've never talked about you and your experiences, and that's really what I wanted to do today and get across with you. So the role with Campy, initially, was that a sales role, or did you come in straight as ambassador?
Yeah, how it all started off, I was approaching retirement age, or an age where I could retire. And I didn't really want to, but I couldn't see me travelling very much further for the company I was. And it was a conversation I had with Richard at Windsor, at Soltex at Windsor, in the September. I was due to pack up in the November. And I knew he was looking for somebody to just sell stuff, really. And I said to him, well, I'm coming up to retirement age. I don't particularly want to retire, and I'm available. I can certainly give you 12 months, if not longer. And in his own, he's got Simon with him, Simon Grumble, who was working with him at the time. In his own inimitable way, he sort of looked at me and sort of grinned. He said, well, I was rather hoping for somebody with a bit more longevity than you, Poggy. But let's see what comes up. So suitably chastened and turned round and walked away, and thinking, well, that didn't go too well, did it? And 3 or 4 days later, I got a telephone call saying, you best come up and see me. When are you packing up? So I told him again, 5th of November, which was my birthday. And I started with him on the 7th, I think it was.
That's 15 years ago.
Aye.
And in that time and the time before, you must have seen a lot of unusual things. What's the strangest thing you've seen in a turf care environment that we can repeat?
Yeah, I've seen 1 or 2 things that weren't worth repeating. I think one of the revelations I had right at the beginning was the method of the way that greenkeepers at that time looked after it. I think seeing ponies on a golf course, not working, grazing, was a bit of a revelation. Of course, we've seen deer doing a lot of grazing and sheep. But some of the methods that the groundsmen used back in those days, using like soft soap watered down to control various types of either disease or pests. I guess these came from the Victorian kitchen gardens and all those type of things. Inappropriate use of equipment really is always been a bit of a bone of contention with the way that we've worked. And I think there's been a lot of very interesting anecdotes that you could tell, a lot of them not recorded really, but I can't think of one that stands out over and above, apart from mowers in lakes and things of that nature.
Okay.
But one of the things I can remember, which amused me, was at a public demonstration, and we had a golf course. It was down in the southwest of England, and it had been raining, and there was a fella demonstrating a hillside tractor, and because it was a hillside tractor, he wanted to go across a hillside with it. It was one of a relatively new course, and the ground was made up. It hadn't really settled down too much, and he was warned against going across this slope because it had been quite wet. But no, it was a hillside tractor, and he wasn't going to go up and down the hill. He was going to go across, and it must have gone about 30 or 40 yards across with a huge number of people watching him. And he got to the point where he could feel the unit starting to slip sideways, and he did the worst thing he could have done. Instead of turning up the hill and putting his foot down, he put the brakes on, and the tractor slowly slid down this bank for must have been 60, 80 metres, through a fence and down a drop, and all the scrub that was in this area in between the golf course and the road, which was about 20 foot below him, held this tractor up. And it was just the balletic effect of this tractor sliding sideways down a hill, which was very funny. It must be said that everybody else laughed apart from the lad that sat on the seat.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Brown trouser time.
The fact it was done in public, I think, made it more amusing. But there was nothing else you could do.
And did that lad go on to be famous in any way, shape, or form? What did he? And that you're not going to tell me who it was.
No.
Okay. All right. Okay. Another thing that
I must emphasise, it wasn't me.
It's not that I had a friend kind of story then.
A twin brother. No.
Yeah. Strange things, but you must have seen a lot of changes that have been innovations. Who do you think has been the drivers of innovations, and whether that's from the manufacturers and equipment side, or actually groundsmen and greenkeepers? Who are the people that have stood out in your 40 plus years?
I think if you look at the industry as a whole, it's changed out of all proportion to what it used to be. I mean, if we go back like into the 60s, and you still see colour TV pictures of football matches played on mud or desert because they'd put so much sand on. So in the football or rugby or the stadium type turf, the big influencer have to be major influencers like Steve Braddock. and a lot of the people that worked in the inertia, Paul Burgess and Darren, and there's a lot of people that worked with him and were influenced by him, and they've grown this trade into such a remarkable industry. I've travelled all over the world, both for work and for pleasure. You'll never see sports turf as good as you see in this country, and that's a tribute to the groundsman. The method of, all right, hybrid turf come into it. Let's not talk about plastic, otherwise we will be in for a very tedious conversation for a long time. But allowing for that, the standard of sports turf is absolutely remarkable, and it's a tribute to these people. Now, the equipment's had to grow with it, and the likes of Co Rodenberg, who developed the Coro, and of course Richard, who pushed it, it would have stayed where it was in Holland if it hadn't have been for Richard. And then you've had other groundsmen. I mean, trying to think of one or two off the top of my head. Carl Pass was one of the first. He was a groundsman at Sheffield University when I first met him, and he was never happy with the standard of his turf. And he saw the Coro. Richard took him to see it, and he said, "This is the answer." And of course, he built a business on it. And people like that have driven the industry forward. It's not finished yet. They talk about where they want to develop and go with it. I mean, stadium lights have made a big difference. I don't know whether in a green environment we can afford the electricity bills, but it's inevitable because of the stadiums that don't get so much natural sunlight. You're going to have to use something. So it's continually driving it forward. In the early days also, even when I joined the ground care industry in the early 80s, greenkeeping's changed beyond all measure. Again, you only have to look at the television and you see Tony Jacklin putting his winning putt wherever it was, and you watch the ball travelling across the green. If it did it like that today, even at a lower standard club, the greenkeeper would get a sack, wouldn't he? And I think equipment manufacturers have had to develop new techniques, new equipment to continue with that pace. In the early days, I think they used to water the grass, they used to fertilise it and cut it, and that was it. And some of the mowers they had back in those days, I mean, even the ones that we used to strap round little Izeki tractors were quite antique by comparison to where they are today. We still got the same principle, high-speed metal, wearing away, although people have played around with lasers and for cutting grass. It's never seemed to have developed any further than that. Cylinder types have developed, and I think altogether changed from the early days, but hey, things have to progress. And I think the standard of greenkeeping, and this is probably a tribute down to education as much as anything, has changed dramatically. There are more technicians these days than just greenkeepers, and it's again being driven onwards and upwards. It's nothing to do with competitions, golfers or anything else. I think it's just a natural desire to continue to improve and develop, and it's a tribute to a lot of the top class greenkeepers or course managers, supervisors, call them what you will. And again, I can say without fear of contradiction, the standard of turf on golf courses in this country is second to none anywhere in the world. I know we've got different climates, but it's just a personal view. I'm not a golfer, so I can't say how it plays or whatever, but we've had to just keep pace, Martin. If we don't, we wouldn't have had an industry, wouldn't have had a job.
So what you're saying is that the skill and the innovation has come from the turf care professionals and manufacturers have kept up with it, or do you think there's been a bit of both?
I think a bit of both. We've been very fortunate. We found a couple of entrepreneurial characters, the likes of Glenn Black, R2G2, and Co Ronenberg, have developed equipment to try and progress our industry and help with the greenkeepers side of things. And I think by and large we've succeeded. In terms of innovation, I think you have to keep trying things. Without that, you're never going to move forward. You're going to do like some of the major influencers in manufacturing process have sort of stayed quite within their own bubble and never moved forward. They've never tried to develop other stuff. What we've got is here and now, and that's going to be good enough to take you forward. You can't do that. You've got to continue to develop. And as I've very often said, when it comes down to innovation, sometimes when you think you're on your way to Thailand, you end up in sock shop. Or you do have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. And we've tried, or Campys particularly, have tried all sorts of things, and you find a jewel in your crown occasionally.
So you have a reputation of bringing the odd jewel to market. I mean, there's a couple that stand out as far as I'm concerned. Air2G2 that you just mentioned, and also Coro.
Yeah.
Without giving any secrets away, what are you looking for when you're evaluating pieces of equipment? I know people are obviously now probably knocking on your door constantly saying, would you take a look at this? Would you be interested?
I think you have to look at it commercially as much as anything. What's it? How much is it going to sell? Units are important. You do invest an awful lot in bringing a product to market, particularly when it's new and innovative. It costs you a lot of money in time and transport and development costs. So you have to be certain that it's going to sell in numbers. We mentioned earlier on innovation and where it's going to go. We are approached by quite a number of different people, even as recently as Soltex. And you have to sort of look at it and think, is it something that we can deal with? What is the market possibilities? Cost always has an influence. And I think when we're looking at things like robotics, which is going to come, we've been talking about this for 30 odd years. I know that we were introduced to a company based down here in Gloucestershire in Stroud that had developed a mower that would work off GPS, and you programmed whatever pattern you would like into your laptop or computer of some sort, and you pressed a button, sent it to text, and away it'd go, and it had emptied the box at prerequisite points, and it was brilliant. But at that time, the cost of it was about 45 grand. This is, I'd say, going back into the 90s. And it wouldn't replace a man, although people expected it to, because they do so much more than just cut grass.
Yeah.
In the turf industry, turf grass growers, we saw automated harvesters without men on, and we could see that this was going to develop. But again, initially it was a matter of cost. Again, the turf grass market, which we are involved in as well, has changed out of all proportion to where it used to be. It's become more automated. And when you're looking at that automated side, that's going to be the next big thing. Golf courses are already playing with automated mowers working not from GPS but from cables buried underground.
Yeah.
Which again, we tried quite a number of years ago, before in pre-Campy days, with these mowers, and they were quite successful, and that is going to come with the likes of automation in stadiums. Again, it will come. It's inevitable. So nothing at this moment in time is new. We talked about cylinder mowers. Cylinders are still the same thing it was all those years ago. When they were since they were first developed, cutting carpets. And I think that's where the next big change is going to come, and it's inevitable. I said at a meeting of turf grass growers, I can't remember how many years ago, but it's a long, long time, that I foresaw the time where you wouldn't even need to have anybody on a harvester. It would all be done. Of course, everybody laughed because they were still using two-men harvesters in those days. There was a fella on the back stacking the turf. And so that was a back-aching job, that was. I was going to say something a bit stronger, but at the meantime. But all those sort of things, you can look into your crystal ball when you stood in front of a group of people, and you can sort of give all your ideas forward. And sooner or later, they do come to fruition. we've now got fully automated harvesters that will work without anybody on them at all, as we have mowers. Whether or not will ever be accepted by the health and safety executive is extremely dubious, particularly in this country and in North America, of course, because their litigation system is much more stringent than ours.
So away from automation, what other innovations do you see coming through in the next few years? Obviously, we're in the midst of a cultural climate revolution, if you like, climate change, how we deal with it. Battery power is very much at the forefront of people's minds at the moment. From your experience and what you're seeing coming through, is that the answer in the future, or are there other alternatives?
As a personal opinion, no, I don't think batteries are the right way to go. I think we should be putting our effort more into hydrogen. Weight factor, I think lithium is probably a finite quantity, in a finite substance. It's not harmed very effectively. We recently did a show in Letchworth, Groundswell. It's an agricultural show. And I think I described it as a show for hippie farmers, because it's all about ploughless farming, the environment, preservation of carbon assets and carbon exchange. And it was a very interesting exercise, and there was lots of conversations and seminars by people who are far more qualified to talk about it than I am. And they were telling me, or a young gentleman was telling me, that batteries weren't the way to go, that the amount of carbon expended harvesting enough lithium to make a battery that would power a family car would expend as much energy as it would take to run a normal car on fossil fuels for 40 years. Now, it's a bit of a statement to make, and it's a bit extrapolated, but he seemed to know what he was talking about. I don't. But I still don't think that batteries, what are you going to do with them when you're finished? It's a bit like rubber crumb in a plastic carpet. What are you going to do with it? It migrates into watercourses, the rubber crumb. The batteries, are you going to bury them? They won't let you bury car tyres. Why will they let you bury batteries? I think JCB are making big steps forward. I know Honda and Toyota have got these hydrogen cars. Imagine a 100 horsepower tractor or so many kilowatt tractor, the size of the battery that we would need to make it run all day. We've got a fully battery operated out front rotary mower. We've discussed this because we've done a YouTube thing on it a few years ago. It's what we've got presently. I don't think it's necessarily the right way to go. However, in my lifetime, I think we're going to have to live with batteries in the short term. I can't see the hydrogen power. I don't think the government putting enough effort into it. They've not thought it through. I've got a hybrid car, which I think is brilliant, but I don't think it's way forward. I still need to pull up at the fuel pumps now and again and fill it up. As far as the automation side of it goes, I think it's inevitable. We were talking to somebody who got a weeder, and I just thought to myself at the time when it's very authentic, it looked very efficient and did what it did. But where would be the market? If you introduce that to a professional football club, they'd look at it and think, why do I need that? You walk around, the grass stands up and salutes you. It stands to attention when you get close to it. There ain't any weeds in it. But there are other sides to the market, like the local authority market, sports clubs in general. Whether they could fund it or not, I don't know. Cutting grass is going to be automated. I remember saying, again, a long time ago, that I think that every green will have a dedicated cylinder mower in a little bunker by its side, and the greenkeeper or course manager will come in the morning and they'll press a button and these little mowers will come out. They'll cut the grass, they'll dump it, and they'll go back and hide again. That's not very far away, you know. It's not in this country, I don't think, but the other side of the water it will.
There's one thing that I think irritates groundsmen and greenkeepers about the status of their job? You've mentioned back in the day, perhaps they did just fertilise, cut and water. Yeah. Now there's a lot more science to it. But do you actually think the core skills of turf care professionals are better now than they were back in the early 80s when they didn't have all these tools?
I think in general, yes. There were odd individuals back then that really wanted to push the boundaries and continue to push the boundaries within their own limited scale. But these days, with the benefit of the education that's available, they are far more professional. I sometimes think they're losing a little bit of the natural touch, the instinct a lot of the old greenkeepers had. It's a bit like me and gardening. I'm not a gardener. If I see a bit of soil there, I can dig it. But you talk to somebody who's into that type of thing, they're very much more technical these days than ever they were. And they don't want to fly by the seat of the pants where the old greenkeepers and gardeners did. There's so much advice as well, isn't there, from not only the trade, but from their organisations. And what's easier these days than Googling it? Just put it in there, and so much, a lot of it is conflicting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of criticism out there as well because of the internet, social media, etc.
Yes.
So yes. I think the pressures are different.
Yes, they are. But from a greenkeeper's point of view, it does mean that the Greens Committee are very much Google greenkeepers, and they can tell the greenkeeper what he's doing wrong. I don't envy them. The political side of being a greenkeeper and a groundsman is it's fraught. And there are several courses, some not very far away from AMSAT now, that are managed by the greenkeeper, Greens Committee, or individuals on it rather than the greenkeeper. I don't think it's a good thing, that is.
No. Everybody now, a little knowledge is dangerous, isn't it? Yeah. As they say.
But I do think that with the way that things have changed, and the IT side of it has helped enormously. I also think their expectations are far higher than they ever were. I think a greenkeeper back in the day looked after his own golf course. He probably hadn't got quite the same competition from surrounding golf courses that they have today. And I do think that they have to keep up more. The standards have to be higher. It's demanded. The likes of TV has made sure. We can't look at Augusta. That's not a real golf course. That's a garden with grass that they play golf on. But there's an awful lot of people expect that when they go down and pay their 25 quid or whatever to play around a golf. Never mind about what mess they make leaving the grass.
Yeah, bad putt and stab the putter in the green. It's been a long career to look back on, but let's look a little bit to the future for you. You don't seem like the type of guy that wants to, hang his hat up and retire. You're considering what you do over the next few years. Are you sticking with it, or have you got other plans, Poggy?
This is something that you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and whittle about. I still enjoy what I do. The going out to exhibitions and seminars and demonstration runs and anything, you see a lot of people. I still enjoy that. I still love the interaction with any side of the industry. Turf grass. I'm still on the council at the TGA, so I'm mixing on that side of things. And we haven't talked much about them, but the changes that the growers are making, the specialty grasses, and the carpets that they're growing. These are a different breed of people to the ones that I first started with. So I still enjoy that. I still enjoy going to the shows and exhibitions, whether at Harrogate or the NEC, talking to people, seeing them. They come back sometimes just to say hello, and that's always nice. listening to their ideas and everything. The last thing you want to be thought of is that old bugger who doesn't know whether to pack up or not and keeps getting in everybody's hair. And that's something I don't want to think about being one of, whether I am presently or not.
Certainly not.
To me.
Certainly not.
I really don't know. I think this last couple of years have taught me one thing, that I don't need to be out on the road doing 200 miles a day. I've learned that I don't have to get up in the morning. I still get up at pretty much the same time, but nowadays I don't have to. That's nice. I think I've got a bit more exercise because I'm home a bit more and walking every day. That's been good for me. I've lost a bit of weight. No expense account lunch times. Staying up late at night, entertaining and drinking. And late to bed. I think, you know, of recent experiences, that turf summit we did, that was really good. And that was probably the first one back that I did properly. And I enjoyed it. It makes you think, if you do pack up, are you going to miss that? Well, yeah, I am. And it's the people I'm going to miss. Not being on the motorway at 6 o'clock on a Friday night, chucking it down with rain. I still listen to the radio on Friday afternoons, Friday evenings, and I listen to the traffic news. And I sit here with a beer in my hand, listening to the M6 is choked up. There's a 2-hour delay here, and they've closed Birmingham Airport, and I'm stuck in Copenhagen or something like that. And I'm sat here with a beer, I'm thinking, this is the good old this is how it is. And yeah, I don't know, does that answer the question or not? I think a lot does depend on this COVID thing. You know, it's regardless of how you view it, it's making a difference to all of our lives. And I'm not quite sure we should appreciate it. I think we should kick it off. It's influenza, but it's a very serious threat, and I think people are running scared of it, you know?
Yeah, and it's not my place to get into all of that, to be frank, Poggy, because I'm not clever enough to understand what the real thing is, but it's certainly given us a tough couple of years for everybody in a lot of different ways. And just as we think we're coming through and back to normal, yet again, we take a couple of steps back, it appears. But fingers crossed, it's all under control. And by the time we get to the next event, which I'm assuming you're going to be in Harrogate, are you planning to go there?
Yeah, we're planning on going up there.
And are you going out to any of the shows in the States, or are you leaving that to other people now?
No, I think those sort of days have gone. The company are doing 2 big shows. I think this last couple of years has brought that to a halt for me, the long distance travel and everything. But these things change, don't they? You know, we're talking about changes. I made a couple of notes when we were earlier on about the biggest single changes that have been in our industry in my working career with them. And I think one of the biggest ones was the private competitive tendering in local authorities.
Right.
But prior to that, local authorities had 5 or 6 different departments. They had the parks and grounds, they had the highway, they had the other bits and pieces that went on. And they all had their own little budgets. They'd all come to a show, or whether it's Soltex or a county show, and they'd go around looking at equipment, and they'd spend it how they thought, and they had to answer for the consequences. Like the highways, you know, sort of cutting grass verges and hedges, and the parks and grounds and sports fields, sports side of things. You got to know people, you sort of got settled in your little industries and your relationships, and it worked very well. For whatever reason, we knew there was an awful lot of money wasted. There was a lot of money spent that hadn't need to be spent. We wanted to put a stop to it, but to throw it out, all the local authorities got rid of all their equipment and went to the big contractors. This is what made a big influence on the industry as a whole, where I think a lot of manufacturers got involved direct with these big contractors and supplied them with equipment. It wasn't always successful, you know. The standards of the grounds was appalling for quite a number of years. And I don't think it's got back close to it again. And this is why we see the advent of more plastic. We had some good groundsmen in those days. I mean, they might have been a bit stayed in the ways, but they did look after the grass in the sports field, local authority sports fields. That was a big change. And of course, the IT thing, where we wouldn't be able to do this back in the days.
And more data driven now as well. I think the industry is another thing. You know, everything's backed up now with evidence.
Yes. Again, it comes back to your seat of your pants stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, particularly high profile groundsmen that I talk to now, Premier League and top flight football clubs in the main, they're protecting themselves with data because they're getting criticised. And if, you know, God forbid, Lionel Messi falls over and twists his ankle, and, you know, the pitch could have given way, or, you know, the groundsman's going to get blamed, they're backing themselves up saying, well, look, no, it's exactly the same as it was for the 6 months before that, or, you know, the 6 years before that. So don't blame the pitch. I can show you.
That's right. I remember a story, and I know you've interviewed Paul, and he was saying Real Madrid, Ronaldo was there, wasn't he? And he missed a penalty. They put it over the bar or something. And he just looked up and stamped his foot 3 or 4 times around the penalty spot, indicating it wasn't his fault. And that penalty spot was dead flat. So Lionel Messi twisting his leg, it data driven.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure that's as good a thing as it could be, because it does tend for people to do the same old thing because it's there. You've got to continue to push the boundaries. Yeah, that new stadium that Tottenham have got, they say, wow, that's some place. And I know it isn't everybody who can afford to do that sort of thing, but it's down to that bit of grass in the middle. And I went to Wembley back in the day and walked on the pitch at Wembley. And this would be in the 80s, early 80s.
So old Wembley.
The old Wembley. And I walked across that pitch and it was like walking on a mattress. It was springy. And you thought, there's no wonder all those players. You only used to play on it about 5 or 6 times a year.
Yeah.
Used to get cramp. And the reason it was so springy was it was full of thatch. They hadn't a method of getting rid of the thatch. So they didn't bother. They just watered it and fed it. And, you know, it suffered because of it. Nowadays, look at the surfaces in there. I know it's a new Wembley.
Yeah.
But even in all these they're wonderful surfaces. And yes, they may be data-driven because they're doing the same old thing, but we would never, groundsmen in those days would never have dared do any of that. And I remember stories of talking about introducing the Coro into countries, into France and Spain, and the groundsmen looking in horror at the damage that they were doing to their pristine surfaces. And said, come back in 6 weeks and say the same again. And you've got groundsmen wanting to lie down in front of the tractor to stop you doing it. but of course, it's innovation, and we had the confidence, or the company had the confidence to keep progressing with it and doing it. But it's change, and it will continue to change. I don't know where it'll go, but it's been enjoyable looking at it.
I'm sure there's a few more years left for you, because you said you don't know the answer. I think it's quite obvious. You're not ready to quit yet, Poggy. You're going to carry on for a bit.
Well, we'll keep hoping. But just be wary of being that silly old so-and-so that didn't know when it was time to hang his hat up. Don't know. Perhaps my wife will tell me. Perhaps it might be RJC himself. Put his hand on my shoulder. I don't know. Or maybe I'll wake up one morning and say, I don't know whether I want to do it anymore.
Well, personally, I hope that day's a while off.
Well, thanks for that.
We've had some great conversations down the years. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Poggy. bit different to do it over this. We're normally face to face at an event, but we'll do that again in Harrogate, no doubt.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed. I hope so.
Good stuff. See you then, and take care. And thanks again, Poggy.
Okay, mate.